Hello everyone, and welcome to Debonair Cyber. My name is Devin, and in today's video I want to get started on the wonderful world of web application pen testing. More specifically, I want to get started on the Web Application Security Academy from PortSwigger. They have many learning paths, and today I want to start on the server-side vulnerabilities path. I hope you're ready. Let's get into it. With all that out of the way, I think we're ready to get started here. Here we are with the Web Security Academy learning paths. So you can find this under the Academy tab and learning paths. And the one that I want to get started on today, again, is the server-side vulnerabilities. This learning path introduces you to a range of common server-side vulnerabilities. It's perfect if you're new to web security or want to get an overview of the kinds of vulnerabilities that exist, as well as how an attacker might identify and exploit them in real-world systems. So really, if we're brand new to web application security, first of all, thank you for being here. And if you're enjoying everything so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe. But with us being brand new to web application security, this is the perfect place for us to start. So I would want to I'm going to click resume here. This is going to take me into the first page of the path traversal. And here we can see that these articles are really well written. They don't do a lot of like extra fluff or whatever in the articles here. So we can just straight up read path traversal is also known as directory traversal. This is where we're going to be traveling in between different file folders on the host machine that's hosting the web application, right? It allows an attacker to read arbitrary files on the server that's running an application. It could include application code, data, credentials for backend systems, sensitive operating system files such as etc password. In some cases, an attacker might be able to write an arbitrary file on the server, allowing them to modify application data or behavior and ultimately take full control of the server. So in some cases, this really can be as bad as remote code execution, depending on the type of path traversal that you actually have present. So another thing here, I also have my notes pulled up for path traversal. I set up a new page for the PortSwigger Web Academy specifically, and I'm just going to start taking some notes here on what I think would be, like I said, from this page here, what I think would be some relevant information that I would want to know later. I think most importantly, it is important for us to write down that this path traversal is also known as directory traversal. If we go to search for this in our notes and we want to search for directory traversal because that's what we've been hearing lately, and we don't have that in this page, it's going to be kind of difficult for us to actually find this in our notes. So as many different like aliases, for lack of a better term, that we can come up with for this particular technique, the better off we are. So AKA directory traversal. And then, of course, we want to actually write down what the vulnerability allows us to do, right? So it enables an attacker to read arbitrary files on the server. Okay, so enables attacker to read arbitrary files on server. And then finally, in this final clause here, it can be as bad as RCE, remote code execution. All right, let's continue on to the next page from here. Here we can see we can read how to actually perform this attack from the ground up. We can see a shopping application that displays images of items for sale through this JavaScript image tag. So we can see the source that it is loading a specific file, and that file name is 218.png. And then here we get a short description on what the load image actually does. It loads a file name parameter like we talked about and returns the contents of the specified file. The image files are stored on the disk in the location var www images. To return an image, the application appends the requested file name to its base directory. So in other words, all it's doing is taking this 218 and putting it on top of this var www images to create the full file path that you would expect on the host system. So what we can actually do here, we can see, is add this ... and on a Linux system in particular, for the // this is going to denote this is a specific pointer that is going to direct us one directory upward in the file system. So what this is doing is saying, okay, instead of images, we want to go to www, and then the next one is going to get us into var, and then finally the last set is going to get us into the actual root of the file system, where we can then access a completely different directory, etc, and then password. Does that make sense? So what this is doing is pulling us 3 directories up so that we can get to the root of the file system and then get to etc password. And then here at the bottom, we can also see on Windows, both of these notations are valid directory traversal sequences. And it shows that, once again, that's the same thing, just reversing the slashes on Windows. So honestly, for our notes, I think this entire page is very relevant for us to know. This explains everything that we would actually need if we were trying to perform an attack and we had no idea how to actually perform path traversal. We could just bring this in here and have the full explanation of what everything actually does, right? So we can call this reading arbitrary files. And this is actually a toggle in Notion. I love it because it keeps my notes very, very organized, right? So if we can just copy and paste this in here, and this is actually going to preserve the code blocks that we have here in the original, which is awesome. And then we have these also snippets where you can see the load image, file name are going to be also preserved in Notion and as well, and highlighted in that specific way, so we know what is an actual file path versus what our commands are going to look like. All these different things that Notion can actually do for us. And on top of all that, because we've put this into a toggle, we can just click on the toggle and it all cleans up magically. I love it. So now we have a full explanation of how to actually perform this attack, what we might be looking for. Let us continue on the path here. And we have a lab, file path traversal, a simple case. This lab contains a path traversal vulnerability in the display of product images. To solve the lab, retrieve the contents of the etc password file. Seems simple enough, right? So let's access the lab. And actually, while this is spinning up, I want to come over here into my Kali system that is going to be connected to the internet and start up Burp Suite, because we will need it for this lab. It's PortSwigger. They make Burp Suite, if you didn't know that. So here you go. This is the tool we're going to be using. All right, once you get Burp Suite actually pulled up and running, we go over to the proxy tab and we can open a browser that is actually just linked to Burp Suite itself, so we don't have to play around with any specific proxies. You may have heard of Foxy Proxy. It's the one I like to use, but to keep things very simple, we're just going to use the browser in Burp Suite itself. So now this web application is spun up. We can take this URL and actually just bring it directly into our VM. All right, so now we have this web application pulled up. We can see that it looks like a shopping interface, right? Conversation controlling lemon is interesting. So let's go here into the view details and see this man's wonderful face as he's eating this lemon. We know that this web application is pulling these images from somewhere, right? What we need to know is how. So we can actually just inspect this. So now what we can see on the page here is that we have this image source tag, exactly what we were looking at before in our notes, right? So image source, and then we have this this string here that goes to like a load image file name, and that is exactly what is mirrored here, image file name. And we can see that even when I go to scroll over it, it's pulling that image up. So now what this looks like in practice, if we were to take this up into the actual URL, if we could say image and query file name equals 7.jpg. Okay, if we were to browse to this, we can see that the image itself is going to come up. So this is kind of a peek behind the curtain, right, of how these web applications are actually pulling the pictures that they're using. And we can actually go back to our notes here and see, once again, that it is just pulling from this specific file location, right? So now how do we exploit this? So in our notes before, we saw where instead of going to this 7 JPEG, we want to insert our payload into the file name parameter. So what we actually want to do is this // 3 times and etc password. So we can see here that the image will now break. And I do want just to play around with this for a second. If we were to delete one of these sets of // notation, we can see that there it says, okay, there's no such file. It can't find a file there. But when we give it a legitimate file, it actually breaks the image tag because it doesn't really know how to handle what the information is that's coming back. So now what we can do is turn the intercept on in our proxy and refresh this page. Okay, that's actually going to capture the request that we're sending to the web server, and then we can actually send this over to the repeater. You'll see this tab begin to light up, and when we click send on this, we can actually see that the etc password file is outputted in that response. And this vulnerability obviously gets a lot more complex as you add filtering, as you add validation, those types of things. Really, a lot of web filters will look for this pattern. It's a very well-known pattern. So this is the simple case, right? This is just the proof of concept of like, okay, this is how this is actually supposed to work, right? And a lot of times when you're looking for directory traversal, this will be a payload that you try to exploit, right? Because if you can read etc password, you can read any other file on the system through that vulnerability. But many times you'll have to actually come in and obfuscate that // because it's going to be picked up by some sort of server-side validation, or maybe even client-side validation that you will have to bypass. And those are the actual remediations that you can actually use for this vulnerability, right? Validating that what you are taking into that file name parameter is something that's not going to be dangerous. And this web application in particular is not doing that, which is what allows us to traverse through these directories and pull up the etc password file. And really, we could pull up any file that we know exists on the system. So at this point, we could go and pull any of the source applications for the source code for the web application itself, as long as we know what the file names are. So this video, kind of quick, easy, and simple, but I really prefer that for these these short concepts, just to get an introduction into what is possible in web applications and just dipping our toes into web application testing. And path traversal is the perfect place to start, right? One of the easiest things to kind of like wrap your head around and begin to look for whenever you know that a web application is searching for a specific file. If it's pulling something from somewhere else on the system, this is something that you could try and enumerate for. So I want to thank y'all for coming and learning with me today. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we'll see you in the next one.